good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Anamkara meditation program. With all my heart and with all my love, I thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight is going to be a night when we do some reading and contemplation, so we'll be getting into that in a few minutes. But of course, we're going to start with the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are that way of being able to really help shift the mind out of the day, the week, all the things that occupy the mind, and drawing on the power of the mantra, the power of the infinite that's in sound form. And so the opening mantras are a way, again, of supporting our mind, getting its attention shifted, and coming to rest in some quiet and stillness. And that's part of why then at the end of the opening mantras, we just sit for a few moments in that stillness. Because it's the power of the mantra that is really affecting the mind to be able to help draw it back to its source. We come to know that source most fully and deeply in that stillness and in that silence. So we'll begin with the opening mantras. Shri Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai Tajanambo Taganari Sevitam Kalpita Jambo Palacharu Bhakshanam Umasukam Shoka Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamidaya Purnamevavanshishyate Om Shanti 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 Shri Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai. So once again, with all my heart, I welcome you to our program tonight. Satsang, keeping the company of the highest, the truth. And that's what you are. You're the embodiment of that highest one. And so thank you for bringing the power of your presence, the power of your practices, the power of your commitment to practice to our program this evening. And especially thank you for being the ones who are doing practices and then walking that wisdom into the world. Walking the love, the compassion, the openness of heart that comes through the expansion of the meditative practices into the state of that. So last week we were talking about that process and how it could be looked at in the context of the hero's journey, the great monomyth that Joseph Campbell writes about that describes this archetypal journey. And really, in the yogic system, the foundation of the Kundalini practices is all about that. And the symbolic journey through the chakras is all about that hero's journey. And our everyday practices are about that. And so one of the things I wanted to get into, continuing with that this evening, was I had mentioned, and some people have read, my book, The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within. And in that there are various teachings, lessons, and visions, kind of these archetypal stories that have unfolded, all by the grace of this awakened power that in the yogic system we call Kundalini Shakti. Of course, it's the same power that's known in other traditions as Holy Spirit, as Shekinah, as Chi, this extraordinary power of the infinite, the consciousness of the infinite, that as it is beginning to stir and move and transform these instruments of mind and body, they expand our awareness, they expand the experience of who we are beyond the confines of the ordinary mind, so we can come to know the fullness, the richness of our own divine self, and see it everywhere, in everyone. Nothing, no one left out. That's that hero's journey. Of course, in the Eastern traditions, that's looked at as a journey that unfolds across many lifetimes, right? But we can see that same kind of journey, that same kind of process happens moment by moment. You know, when Joseph Campbell was talking about sort of the three main sort of phases of that journey, one was kind of the call, having to leave the ordinary confines of the ordinary mind, the ordinary world, and then crossing a threshold on that search, that quest, that journey. And with that comes an initiation, because it's an initiation is a transfer of power. It's the power of consciousness that begins to expand. That transformation, that initiation can happen through an individual, through practices, in a dream, many different ways for that awakening to begin to unfold. Then there are tests, there are trials that go on in a subsequent phase, and obstacles that have to be met, and that push us beyond the confines of who we think we are, until we get to that place where we're really holding the wisdom, the jewels, in this sense, in the context of the hero's journey in sadhana, in spiritual practice, in yoga. That means coming to that full realization and having it become steady wisdom that we can then live into the world. So the hero's journey is never complete until there's that return, and then bringing the gifts of what one has learned and experienced back into the world for the benefit of others. So we can see that whole context even unfolding in simply sitting for meditation in the morning or whenever one is doing it, because then you're stepping back from the world, you're going in to this other domain where a different kind of consciousness is required, and a different kind of consciousness than the ego mind begins to unfold. And then as we're maybe inspired or just more relaxed, whatever that the outcome of that is in that particular meditation, we then walk that into the world, meaning we bring it into our family life, we bring it into our work life, we bring it into everyday existence, because that's how it gets integrated and benefits everyone. So the hero's journey. So I was going to share and read some from The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within. And this is an allegory, sort of a mythic story. It's called The Golden Spoon. And you'll see how it relates to the hero's journey. To give you a context for how this happened, I was sitting actually as a part of my practices for decades. Every morning, in addition to meditation, I would do a chant of a Sanskrit text of 181 verses. And it would take about an hour and a half. And this vision actually unfolded just by the grace of that power, that Shakti, that Kundalini, the grace of the infinite. Even while I was sitting there chanting and playing the harmonium in my sacred chamber of my home, and this is what unfolded at the same time. So here we begin. Once there was a community of people who lived in a very hard and barren land. The entire town was built on an arid, rocky plateau. As far as the eye could see, not a blade of grass grew anywhere. The monotony of gray stone assaulted the eye in every direction. People lived on small plots of land with high stone walls enclosing their little dust bowl yards. The walls rose nearly as high as the stone houses imprisoned within. None of these homes had basements, but the ground was too difficult to excavate. Life here was as hard as the land. People owned very little, and in their effort to survive, they clung to every bit of it, whether it was food, valuables, or beliefs. Now one night, a young man with a wife and 2 children had a strange dream. And in his dream, a luminous old man, dressed in royal robes, resplendent with gold and gems, told him to begin digging in his backyard. He awoke with a start, looked around in the dark, and seeing nothing, dismissed it. And he thought, what a ridiculous idea, digging in this rocky country? And he thought that just before going back to sleep. But the richly dressed old man appeared again in his dream. Dig in your backyard. Dig until you find the great treasure. You and your family will never want for anything again, the old man told him. Jolted awake, he carefully got out of bed, leaving his wife undisturbed. He looked in on his son and daughter, who were there lying peacefully asleep. On his way downstairs, he thought to himself, this is more than ridiculous. It's impossible. Nobody has any kind of tool that can dig into this ground. What am I doing up at this hour? And back to bed he went. Well, sleep overcame him. For a 3rd time that night, the old man appeared in his dreams. He handed the family man a gleaming golden spoon and instructed him to use it for penetrating the rocky ground. This time he slept on, and when he awoke in the morning, he found his hand clutching a golden spoon. He got up and ran outside. The golden spoon shone in the morning sunlight. Somehow it seemed to glisten with more than just the reflected light of the sun's rays. Could such a little thing actually break through the granite-like earth beneath his feet? He went to the far corner of his yard, hoping no one would see him attempting what everybody knew was impossible. He was embarrassed just thinking of using a spoon to dig into bedrock. He knelt below the high stone wall, took out the golden spoon, and struck the ground with it. He fully expected it to bend as soon as it hit, but to his amazement, the golden spoon slid into the stone and dislodged a piece of rock as he pulled it out. It's a miracle, he thought. And his mind raced forward. Well, did this mean that the words of the old man in the dream were true? Would he find great wealth for his family? Well, the man kept digging enthusiastically with his magic spoon. All day he toiled, and bit by bit the hole grew bigger. The golden spoon never dulled nor showed so much as a scratch from the hard use. And before retiring to bed, he told his family of all that had happened. Well, they were incredulous. And then his wife said, well, after all, for all your work, what do you have? No jewels, no treasure, only fatigue and a small empty hole in your backyard. But he wouldn't be discouraged. And he kept remembering the dream from the night before and the old man's words. And exhausted, he fell asleep. Each day the man went out to his backyard and dug deeper. The hole grew slowly. Weeks passed by. The initial amazement of neighbors and friends wore off, becoming skepticism and scorn as the months went by. The man's enthusiasm faded along with the dreams of the old man. Finally, one night, as he was getting ready to sleep, he told his wife that he thought he would quit digging and take the spoon to the city where it could be melted down and sold for its precious metal. She was delighted. The man slept fitfully that night, and just before dawn he found himself in a dream. The old man appeared once again and told him not to give up. his toil was not in vain. Placing his hand on the family man's head, the old man seemed to draw out all of his weariness and infuse him with renewed vigor. The dream ended, and as the sun rose, the man awoke, determined to continue until the promised wealth was his. Every day he worked in his backyard with the magic spoon, and the hole continued to expand. After some years, it was larger than his house, taking over the rest of his property. His son and daughter were nearly adults by now, and the father rarely thought about the riches anymore. He simply went out each day and did the work the old man in his dream had told him to do. One afternoon at sunset, just as the father was finishing his labors, something glowed from the depths of the excavation. He scampered down the sloping sides of the pit, and there in the rock was a jewel filled with faint light. Taking out his magic spoon, he used it to free the gem from the stone. It was perfectly exquisite. The gem rested in the palm of his hand, giving off a pale emerald light. It must be priceless, he thought. His family was delighted over the newfound wealth, and the next day the father kept working. He sent his son to the city to sell the jewel. The son got a very good price, but squandered some of the money on the way home. His father forgave him and continued digging with the magic spoon, and over time more and more jewels appeared. But he and his family continued to live modestly while they saved up a cache of gems. The old man appeared in a dream again and gave him several of the magic spoons and instructed the father to tell everyone in the town that the same wealth could be theirs if they just used the magic spoon, he was to give one to anyone interested. Well, the next day he offered them to people, but to his astonishment, almost nobody took one. They either didn't believe him or they wanted a guarantee. When will the jewels start to arrive? Week after week, he tried to give away the magic spoons, but no takers came forward. He hoped that one day the villagers would finally discover the truth for themselves, as he had. Occasionally a person would take a magic spoon, go home to begin the work, but invariably they would quit, complaining to the father that it demanded too much effort. Once a wanderer appeared, took the offering, and disappeared. He was never seen again, and the spoons mysteriously disappeared shortly thereafter. Well, the father had grown old and was near death, and one evening he called his children to him and instructed them to continue to use the magic spoon for the work of uncovering the buried treasure in the rock. He divided the store of jewels between them and told them to take good care of their mother for her few remaining years. Quite contented, he died. But not long after his death, the jewels ceased to appear. The family had more than enough stored up to allow them to live very comfortably for all their lives, and the son wasn't the least bit interested in continuing to mine for the jewels. Instead, he satisfied himself traveling the world, spending and investing his wealth in global trade. But the sister carried on the work of digging alone. She enjoyed the solitude of the mine. One day the brother returned after months of being away and learned that his mother had died. His sister continued to work the mine in their backyard. He tried to convince her that she should give up her futile endeavors. She had yet to find a single jewel, he argued, while his wealth was growing from all his business deals and trading. He left her to consider what he had said. She returned to her digging and thought about what she should do. While working with the magic spoon in the depths of the mine, an old man, dressed in fine robes studded with gems, suddenly stood before her. She remembered her father speaking of such an old man in his dreams. The old man told her, "Persevere, keep digging, and more than mere treasure would be hers." As suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. Later she told the brother of the apparition and his message. The brother said he had had enough of old men and dreams and didn't want to deal with the mine anymore. the sister decided to trade her share of the remaining jewels from their father for the brother's share of the magic spoon and the mine. He took her up on the deal, forfeiting any claim to future finds in the mine. He was certain there wouldn't be any, and besides, with his growing financial empire, what did he care for jewels? The young woman lived alone and continued her endeavors with the magic spoon. Her brother loved her and visited her regularly, making sure that she had all that she needed. He couldn't understand how she could survive on what appeared to him such an austere, impoverished life. And what puzzled him even more was that she was so much happier and peaceful than he was. I have everything. I travel everywhere, and yet I'm still restless inside. How can this be? He wondered to himself. He knew his sister no longer needed him, but he loved her company and came often to be with her. She found an occasional small jewel. This brought her enough to meet her simple needs and still be able to give some to those in need. Years went by in this way. Early one evening, the brother arrived home for one of his usual visits while his sister was still working alone deep in the mine. With a resounding crack, a fissure suddenly opened in the rock face deep within the mine, and light streamed out. The sister wedged the magic spoon in the opening of the rock and spread it farther apart. The fissure expanded enough for her to climb inside. A soft light emanated from within. At first she felt a bit afraid going in there until she remembered the old man saying, keep going, more than mere treasure will be yours." With great anticipation, she stepped through that fissure and into the heart of the earth. In the soft light, she could see a vast chamber of unimaginable proportions. Far off, in what appeared to be the center of this immense cavern, an exquisite orb of light glowed, nearly too beautiful to behold. With its beams of light, it radiated love, as the sun radiates warmth. She felt her own heart throbbing with love. Where she stood was dimly lit and shadowy, though she could see other people in the cavern. Those near her were dark and dense, while those closer to the light were brighter. All were focused solely on the light. Very slowly, imperceptibly, the light drew them to itself. The ones who had moved nearer that divine effulgence were themselves lighter and clearer. The ones closest to the light were nearly indistinguishable from the light or each other. They sparkled like diamonds. Her gaze turned back to that magnificent light, and it stilled her mind, overwhelming it with divine beauty and love. Her consciousness became completely absorbed in the light. She was no longer even aware of having a body. Well, her brother heard the loud crack from the stone splitting open and ran to the mine. He called to his sister, and receiving no reply, he ventured down into the mine for the first time in his life. Fear threatened to overwhelm him as he made his way into the hidden depths of this dark, unknown mine shaft. Only his love for his sister enabled him to overcome this fear. And at the very end of the tunnel, he saw the fissure with the magic spoon wedged in it. A soft light streamed out through the crack. He yelled his sister's name once again, but still there was no response. The brother rushed toward the opening and caught a glimpse of his sister just before the fissure crashed shut. Only a portion of the spoon protruding from the rock marked the opening that had been there just a moment before. He frantically tried opening the fissure, hurling himself at the sheer rock face, but to no avail. He couldn't budge the spoon. It remained locked in the stone. His beloved sister was gone forever. And beating on the rock in anguish, he cried aloud until exhausted, he collapsed at the base of the tunnel. If only I had stayed with her, he thought, and worked alongside her, I could have prevented this terrible fate. The earth had swallowed her and answered neither his cries nor his regrets. In desperation, the brother offered a huge reward to anyone who would open the rock and free his sister. Hundreds tried and failed. Each year he increased the reward. Finally, on the 7th anniversary of her disappearance, he let it be known that his entire fortune would go to the one who could free his beloved sister. Men using picks, drills, and explosives assailed the stone with all their might, but the stone remained unscathed. Even witches and sorcerers tried casting their spells, only to find themselves cast out. No one could penetrate the rock. Then, as if out of nowhere, an old man arrived in tattered robes, walking with the support of a staff. People laughed as he slowly shuffled down into the mine. He never faltered as he descended, and in the darkness, a soft light could be seen surrounding him. The handle of the magic spoons stuck straight out of the rock at the end of the tunnel. It glimmered as his hand reached for it. Grasping hold of the golden handle, he effortlessly turned it, and the fissure reappeared, opening before him. Everyone gasped and stepped back. Before the brother could get there, the old man stepped through the opening of the rock, and it slammed shut behind him. And once again, the entryway was barred to the brother. Inside, the old man found the young lady. After 7 years, the light had transfigured her. She was clear as crystal, with light radiating from her entire body. Love poured from her heart as she saw the old man, whom she recognized as the one from her earlier vision. To her he appeared in royal raiment of light. He took her by the hand and led her back out. The stone split open, and they passed out of the cavern. The brother and the whole crowd were awestruck by the sight of these two effulgent beings emerging from the fissure. They lit up the depths of the mine as if it were day. The people fell to their knees in reverence before these holy ones. They raised the people up, and the brother rushed forward to embrace his beloved sister. Then he bowed to her with deep respect. Her love enveloped him as it did all who were near her. He called her the Holy Queen of darkness and light, for she reigned over both. People began shouting praises to the Holy Queen. The old man now looked majestic, like a mighty and venerable king in his glowing robes. He told the people that all those who wished to know the light must serve the Holy Queen with devotion and follow her commands with unflinching obedience. The brother asked how they could possibly continue as before, since the magic spoon had disappeared into the stone as it closed for the last time. The old man replied, "She will show you the way." And suddenly there was a blinding flash of light, and he was gone. Only the Holy Queen knew what had become of him. As they left the depths of the mine, it began filling with water. Wonderfully clear, life-giving water. In time, the water softened the earth throughout the country. Flowers, trees, and gardens and waterfalls transformed the barren landscape. And with the lush vegetation came all kinds of wildlife, and people here prospered as never before. The Holy Queen blessed all who came to her. She instructed her brother and other seekers in the mysteries of light. Those who were sincere took on a faint glow when the Holy Queen touched them. To invoke the light and directly experience its transforming rays, she initiated them in the use of the unspeakable word, the name of the unnameable, a practice done in silence that she had brought back from her journey into the depths beyond time and reason. Those who became adept at the practice were able to move about continuously bathed in light. To those with the vision to see, it looked as if a beautiful light was shining down upon them from just above their their heads. Well, that vision ended a few minutes before I completed my morning chant. Playing the harmonium and chanting kept me focused and grounded in the body, even while part of my consciousness was completely absorbed in that vision. As I continued chanting, my full awareness returned to the body. Chanting made the transition back to waking state consciousness smoother than it had been when I tried coming out of a meditative vision without that. For several days afterwards, my meditations were filled with images from the vision, and in a way similar to what occurred with the Queen's Journey, an earlier story in the book. The meaning and importance of the segments from this vision would present themselves in the mind. And you might add these interpretations to the insights and the ones you discover for yourself. See, the barren landscape with the houses imprisoned behind rock walls represents the condition of the individual's ego mind and ego-directed existence in a shallow, dry, materialistic world. The individual in this cultural setting is little concerned with spiritual life. He dwells in a place lacking depth, and his pursuits are predominantly survival-related. Survival here means more than just biological survival. It includes the ego's constant efforts to sustain itself and its world view. Our Western culture marks success in material dimensions and often gives only lip service to recognizing the existence of spiritual depths worth exploring and developing. One who pursues the path of the spirit is often misunderstood and, in the worst cases, ridiculed or even persecuted. The ego, whether it is our own or someone else's, loathes admitting the existence of the divine self, the presence of God within, and that it's so overwhelmingly greater than the ego mind. It can tolerate the existence of the absolute if such a thing is kept a safe distance away, in heaven or in the form of a dead saint. And it can tolerate one's spirituality as long as it is safely contained, limited to a Saturday or Sunday morning. But the ego rebels when it comes to recognizing the divine, inhabiting the same body that it does. And when the needs of spirit take precedence over its desires, it rebels. Divine intervention, the direct impact of the transcendent self on the individual, is required to uplift a person's path through life and free one from the ego's perspective. The family man symbolizes, in part, the individual living in the ordinary life, bound by limitations both self-imposed and culturally determined. In this way, he represents ordinary waking state of consciousness. The richly dressed old man in the dream symbolizes the self, our inner guide, the inner guru, the transcendent function present in everyone. He directs the man through a dream. That's a time when the ego's grip over consciousness is weaker than usual. Each time he awakens, the ego mode of consciousness reasserts itself, denying what was given to it in that dream state. We frequently do this to ourselves by denying or devaluing knowledge and wisdom made accessible to us in our dreams or meditation or in spontaneous altered states of consciousness that we might enter, such as the insights and intuitions we receive even when we were in a reverie state. But each time the Father awakens, he goes through the doubting and denying of his dream experience and then returns to sleep. Once asleep, out of the grips of the ego consciousness, the old man prods him further along, overcoming his denial, until the final segment of the dream, in which he is actually given a means out of his barren, shallow existence. He doesn't wake up. Some level of ego resistance has been overcome, allowing him to receive the gift and remain asleep. When he awakens naturally, not by the prompting of the ego needing to escape into waking consciousness, he finds the golden spoon in his hand. He has grasped the means to set himself free while in a state of consciousness that gave him access to wisdom and resources not available to his waking state mind. In that deeper state, he was promised great treasure if he were willing to go beyond the surface, dig into the earth, the symbol of the ground of all existence. Entering altered states of consciousness through meditation, prayer, chanting, movement, or some other effective means is necessary to free consciousness from the binding limitations of ordinary waking state mind. The golden spoon seems so small, almost insignificant, yet it's gold. It's invaluable. It has the power to cut through the rock-hard layers of concepts, karmas, the ignorance that cuts us off from the light in our heart, the light of the self at the very core of our being. The gold spoon may be the potent mantra that seems so small, only a few syllables, or the deceptively simple meditation practice, or the prayer that a genuine master gives the seeker, yet it has the full power to take you into the depths. And the earth of the backyard that is to be entered through the mind symbolizes the Divine Mother who gives birth to everything, who contains within her all that is or ever will be. In this form, she symbolizes the totality of unconscious, which contains within it the light of the self. Until we're aware of the self, its light is buried in our unconscious. The self takes on the figure of the old man, manifesting the power of grace, the power of self-revelation, the power of Kundalini Shakti. And manifesting that power of grace begins and compels the Father to open up a way into these greater depths. This is exactly what a true spiritual guide does. For some rare individuals, it may be that they encounter their spiritual teacher only in dreams or visions. For the person confronting dry existence of life without depth, a life without spirit, the action demanded of them is to begin digging in their own backyard. They don't have to run away, go somewhere else, or try to be someone else. The Shakti said, just dig. Start going deeper right where you are. You'll need a wise person to guide you and give you a golden tool to penetrate the hard ground of your existence, she said. Once you have the golden means, the command to go deeper, and the knowledge of the great attainment to be had, your longing will keep pressing you onward. Well, at this point in the story, the Father, symbolizing our ego, hasn't entirely embraced the notion of breaking through unfamiliar boundaries of his existence. The ego self continues to demean the gift of the highest self and ridicules the notion that one can go beyond the ego's realm and that of the barren landscape. But the gifts of grace, the golden spoon, and the dream visions of the old man are so real, so compelling, that the Father puts aside his concerns of embarrassment, the ego's concerns, and puts the tool to use. As promised, it works. The scenario captures the ego's dilemma of having to act on the intuitions or inspirations that come from our depths. And by doing so, the ego is admitting there's something else within us with greater wisdom, greater resources, greater power than the ego itself. In the face of such an influx of grace or inspiration, the ego will do all it can to dismiss the inspiration as meaningless, just a dream, or indigestion from the meal eaten the night before. Often the ego will do almost anything to deny the reality of our transcendent experience in order to preserve itself. Another of the ego's strategies for preservation, not depicted here, is to take over the experience, to identify itself with the source of wisdom and power, inflating itself in the process. The man in this myth demonstrates what happens when the experience of grace is so strong that it can't be denied, and the ego has to serve the transcendent self by acting in accord with it and with what has been given to it. Now, to get the rest of that interpretation, you can read the book. But that's this hero's journey, and the visions, the experiences that come up as gifts of this inner power unfolding, the power of consciousness, the power of the divine that resides within each and every one of us, that's known in the yoga tradition as Kundalini Shakti, Shakti, power of consciousness. It's the unfolding of that through everything from spontaneous meditative experiences, insights, visions, spontaneous movements known as kriyas, changes in the flow of breath that can happen spontaneously. All of these are gifts of grace that happen in the hero's journey on the path of awakened Kundalini. There are challenges, there are trials, there are things that are being encountered. There are limitations that are part of the mind and its wrong understanding, its conditioned patterns that get in the way, that also have to be illumined and disidentified with, so that the energy bound in them can be released and be available. All this is a part of this heroic journey of the unfolding of this power of consciousness within that takes us home to the infinitude of our own being, that takes us home to that boundless wisdom, the boundless love, the boundless joy, the rapturous illumination that is the natural state of our own being. That's what the practices, and that's what the grace that flows through the practices are drawing us to. Just like that woman in that cavern being drawn by the light until she becomes completely transparent to the light within. That's what happens. We become transparent to the effulgence of our own divine self, our own divine being, so that in the simplest way, in everyday life, that can be radiating from us, bringing love and compassion, patience and kindness, wisdom and truth into the world, walking it into the world. That's what the hero's journey culminates in. That's what her return symbolizes. And then that barren, dry well is filled with the water of life. And the whole countryside becomes alive and juicy with that life. And that is what happens when that opening of heart and the expansiveness of being is transforming the barren landscape of the poor ego mind cut off from the infinitude of who we are. We have then, as that unfolds, more and more of that life, that water of life, that light of life, that love of life flowing through. And one of the ways, one of the golden spoons is mantra. So we're going to practice now and chanting the mantra. And we're going to be chanting the great mantra of the Divine Mother, of Shakti herself, of Om Kalima, Om Kalima, Om Kalima, Kali Namo Nama, Om Kalima, Kali Namo Nama, Om Kalima, an invocation of the Divine Mother. And then I bow to you, Kali Namo Nama, I bow to you. That's the ego mind assuming its right position in relationship to your infinite self. Then the ego mind becomes the servant, the loving, devoted servant of the infinite. And that's how we walk the fullness of grace, the fullness of wisdom into the world. So we'll be chanting now for a few minutes, and then we'll just sit in the stillness afterwards. If the mind moves, just keep bringing it back to Om Kalima, Om Kalima. You might say it just silently. It might go fast. It might go slow. It might go with the breath. Just absorb it until, by entering the mantra, by becoming absorbed in the mantra, it draws you into that stillness out of which mantra arises, out of which even your finite self arises. The source is in that stillness, self-luminous stillness, full of the light of love, wisdom, and compassion. So now we'll chant. Shri Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai. Kali Namo Namah. Kali Namo Kali Mahadevi ki jai. We end with this prayer. Then may all our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. That's the journey. That's the journey. Even a practice like this evening, where we step aside from the ordinary world and conventional society, start to go into these deeper realms. Explore that. Receive the gifts of grace that we can receive in that through mantra, through Shakti, through pure consciousness, the living presence of the infinite, the divine. She has countless ways of giving her gifts. If we sit there, open, ready to receive. So many of the practices are really just about getting the mind out of the way so we can experience what's fully present right here, right now. That boundless love, the boundless compassion, the boundless wisdom, the boundless joy, the unshakable steadiness of wisdom and equanimity that empowers us to walk this into the world, to live this into our lives. And so grace gives us whatever we need to bring that into our life, our relationships, our work, our dharma. So we don't have to have what somebody else received. We just be present and open and receive what's given to us with love and reverence. So again, I want to thank you all for coming this evening and bringing the power of your practices, your sublime presence, your divine presence. You already have that light shining. That's the Sahasrara. That's the symbol of that we literally are walking around under the light of grace, under the dome of grace. That's what's symbolized by that. To know that helps to set us free. So we can revel in that delight, being illuminated. Our life is illuminated. So all we have to see is the self, our own self, the divine, everywhere, everything, everyone. That's what we're invited to know, to come home to rest in, and live into the world. So thank you for being ones who carry that consciously, who do practices, who have that commitment, and bring that into the world at a time when it's so desperately needed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So again, with all my heart, with all my love, thank you for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next week.